when was the last time you actually called every number on your emergency contact list? Not reviewed the document, not mailed it around asking people to please update, but actually picked up the phone and dialed. Now, I was thinking about that this week because a bunch of organizations had to find out the hard way if their contact list was up to date and accurate. Schools across multiple states got bomb threats, hospitals cleared floors, and French political party headquarters all went into lockdown. And a pattern started to show up in the reporting that I thought was worth unpacking. So I'm Nicole McDar, and this is Security Unpacked. Today, we're looking at what happens when your emergency plan meets reality for the first time. So let's look at some of these news stories. The bomb threats, schools in New Mexico, Texas, and elsewhere, and that political party office in France. Now, most turned out to be hoaxes, which honestly, that might be the most interesting thing to sit with, because the threats themselves weren't actually that sophisticated. They were just a bunch of threats, but they still caused a bunch of significant operational disruption. Now, what caught my eyes was how many of the organizations discovered mid-event that their notification systems didn't fully work the way that they had hoped or intended. Contact lists that hadn't been updated, alert tools that didn't fire the way that people assumed that they would. And I don't say that to pile on anyone, because this is one of those problems that's common precisely because it's a boring topic. Nobody wakes up excited to audit a phone tree. And it's the kind of maintenance that feels like it can wait until all of a sudden it can't. Or it's a once a year thing that turns into once every 5 years thing. Now, the useful takeaway here isn't shame on them. It's that this is a super easy thing to test, and most of us just don't. So it's just a nudge. On a much heavier note, there was a shooting at an ice rink in Rhode Island this week. And it brought up something that I think about a lot, which is about the gap between daily security operations and event security. A lot of facilities host public events occasionally, open houses, community nights, holiday things. And the security posture for those events is often just the daily playbook, sort of stretched to fit. But the risk profile of a public facing event can be genuinely different. So the crowd dynamics are different, egress requirements change, communication with local law enforcement needs to be proactive, not reactive. And if your facility does do public events, even just a few times a year, it's probably worth having a separate set of procedures for those. Maybe not because your daily approach is bad, but because it's built for an entirely different set of circumstances. It's a different situation. The Dell 0 day on the cyber side, and I promise that this isn't going to turn into a cyber show. I wouldn't know what the hell I was talking about deep enough. I know enough to be dangerous, as they say. But this one had a physical security angle worth mentioning. So China-linked threat actors exploited a Dell vulnerability that made headlines this week. And the reason that it pinged my radar is which systems were being targeted. And that is building management, access control, and surveillance infrastructure. The kind of stuff that lives on your network but exists to run your physical security. And here's the thing about these systems. They almost always run on longer hardware refresh cycles than your typical IT equipment. So while your IT team is patching laptops on a regular cadence, the server running your access control, probably not so much. So that might be on the schedule that nobody owns. So this might be a good moment to ask yourself the question internally, who's responsible for keeping those systems current? Not the physical security side, the software and the firmware side. And a lot of the times the answer is less clear than you want it to be, or you just get stuck in some interdepartment never land where firmware goes to die and software patches get forgotten. But just knowing that it needs to happen hopefully gives you something to work with. Next is the Eurail breach. This is the last one for today's rundown. The Eurail customer data showed up on the dark web this week. That's great. Personal information, travel itineraries, and if you do any work in travel security or executive protection, this might be a useful data point. Every third-party travel platform your people use holds information about where they're going, when, and how. And that's super-de-duper valuable intelligence if it ends up in the wrong hands. And it's worth knowing which platforms your organization uses and what data they're sitting on. Not as a panic move, but just as good hygiene. It's predict, prevent. All right, and I want to talk about red teaming, because this week gave us a really good window into why it matters. So when those bomb threats hit, organizations had to run their emergency response plans for real. under stress with actual stakes on someone else's timeline. And a lot of them found out that they had some gaps that they didn't know that they had. They had communication breakdowns, outdated information, unclear chains of authority. People weren't sure who had the call to give the all clear. And this is exactly the kinds of issues that a red teaming exercise is designed to surface before it matters. So for anyone who's less familiar, a red team exercise is when you bring in a team, either internal or external, to test your security by simulating a real adversary. This is not a tabletop where everybody sits in a conference room and talks through hypotheticals, but this is an actual realistic attempt to probe your defenses and find the gaps. On the physical side, that might look like someone trying to access a restricted area using a fake badge and a lot of confidence, or testing whether your front desk challenges unfamiliar faces and secure zones, or seeing if someone can tailgate through a badge reader during a busy shift change. And I'll tell you that these tests can be humbling, but in a really productive way. They show you what your environment actually looks like under pressure versus what you think it looks like on paper or in your mind. On the cyber side, it might mean attempting to move laterally through a network, compromising a specific system, or exfiltrating data, mirroring what an actual threat actor would do rather than just running a vulnerability scam. But here's the part I really want to emphasize, because I think that there's a lot of organization that leaves some value on the table, and that is the debrief. The exercise itself gives you data. The debrief is where you turn that data into actual improvements. You bring the red team and the defenders get together and you walk through what happened step by step. And this is the key. You keep it about learning. It's important, not blame, because the moment that it changes tone and it becomes punitive, people stop being honest about what went wrong and the whole thing becomes performance instead of progress, and well, that just blows. So the reason this week's bomb threats are relevant is that those were essentially involuntary red team exercises. Nobody chose the timing or the scenario. Nobody set the rules of engagement. And that's sort of the whole argument for doing it yourself, because then you're doing it on your own terms, on your own timeline. You get to let people know what you're doing. You get to find the gaps, but you get to find them on a quiet Tuesday when you have the space to actually fix them. Now, if you've never done one before, start small with just one objective, just one area, physical access to a restricted zone, or whether your alert system reaches the right people within a few minutes. Define the scope, make sure that leadership is on board, set the clear rules of engagement. You'll get much more useful information from one realistic afternoon of testing than from a year of document reviews. And you'll have a clear list of what to improve, which honestly is probably the most valuable thing that any security exercise can give you. All right, so maybe just one thing for next week. Take a look at your emergency notification list, the real one, the one that you'd actually use in a lockdown, and verify it. Check to see if the numbers are actually good. Actually call them, make sure that they're still valid. Send a text message through your notification system to a small group and see if it actually arrives. That's it. If everything works out, great. Now you know. And if something's off, well, great also, because now you've caught it before it actually matters. Either way, you're way better off than you were before you started. And just lastly, this was a good reminder this week that security plans get tested on somebody else's schedule. And when that happens, bad. The organizations that handled things well were the ones that already had been pressure tested, and they knew that their plans worked before it actually counted. That's not a criticism of anyone that found gaps. That's just how it works. Now, you don't know what you have until you actually look. So we'll see what happens next week. We'll keep taking a look for the continued fallout of the China-linked exploits. There's more details coming through on the scope and the affected system, and we'll dig in whatever's worth digging into. Until then, test something, just one thing. You'll be glad you did. I'm Nicole McDowell. This is Security Unpacked, and I'll see you next week.